plant growth and potential. Here, just if you'll just let it be, it'll probably be a whole lot better. There are a bunch of different agricultural processes that are used. There's organic, biodynamic, there's conventional chemical, there's the Mittleiter method. Many of us have used a lot of different methods. But I would suggest to you that there's only one method that is worthwhile, that will always work, and that's biological agriculture. What is that? That's studying a plant to know what that plant needs and then giving that plant what it needs. Now, we go through all this stuff, but if we'll just look at the plant and look at what it needs, study the plant, study the natural processes, we'll find that we'll come out all right. And Mother Nature, as I study the biology, to give you a little background, one of the hats that I originally wore was that of a medical technologist. And I worked in microbiology as my first rotation. And we usually work where we start out. And I love microbiology because it's very straightforward. What you have is you have an environment in which that bacteria is going to grow. And you can change the environment and you can change how that bacteria grows, whether it grows at all or not. And what we're going to be talking about is growing beneficials to take the place of the problems on the plant so you don't have to worry about pests and disease nearly as much. It'll help your growth a whole lot. But before we get started, this thing isn't doing anything now, so I can't go ahead, can I? Oh, yeah. Okay. No, doesn't work. Yeah, it does. All right. Shall we start at the beginning, or you want to go on? Go on. Okay. My goal is to grow real food that contains the maximum biological vitality, allowing it to reach its full DNA potential. Now, we're going to talk about the law of the minimum, which will limit growth, limit vitality, giving us maximum nutrition, maximum production, and a healthy immune system in the plant, giving us disease and insect resistance. We know that the plants communicate with insects, with other plants. We know that the plants communicate with the mycorrhizal rhizomes that colonize the roots. All of this is a whole system. If we understand it, we'll be in pretty good shape and we can aid that system, because I want nutrient-dense production. Gardening is hard work. Growing stuff is hard work. And if I'm going to do it, I want the most nutrition for my effort. I want a program that optimizes the DNA potential to maximize my nutrient density. Well, as a review, there's an optimal growing environment. It involves optimal conditions in soil, light. Incidentally, I don't know about down here, but in southeast Tennessee this year we had a cool summer that was very wet. And because of that cloud cover over an extended period of time, we had a lot of yellow plants, and we had a lot less production than we would have had if we had had the necessary sunlight. Humidity, nutrients being fertilizer and minerals, and temperature, all of these can be optimized for a given plant. Optimal plant growth occurs when we have foundational minerals. Now, Bob Gregory is a good one to talk to about a fertility reservoir of minerals. For the plant primarily, and then we need to use trace elements for human health. And there are several different things that we can use for those trace elements. Tonight we're going to be talking about soil biology. Humus is a good thing that is necessary, and we need a certain amount of energy, and we can optimize the energy in the soil. But tonight we're going to focus on soil biology. Again, in review, most of us think that soil is soil. But optimal soil is only about 50% soil, 25% air, 23 to 25% air, and 23 to 25% water. Grandma Lupke, as she went out into the field saying, the secret is in the soil, made her hand flat and sank it in the soil up to her elbow. Knew what she was talking about. Now, I've seen some dirt that I'd do good to get half a fingernail in. All right? So she was right. The secret's in the soil. 3 to 5, and if you can get 8 to 10% organic matter, you're doing real well. 4% are the major minerals. There are 3, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which are measured in parts per 1,000. 1% are the minor minerals. 15 are generally recognized. They're measured in parts per million. And 0.1% are the trace elements, at least 84 that we know of in the human body, and they're measured in parts per billion. Now, I tend to be more of a naturalist because I want my stuff natural, because I'm not sure that 84 are all that are necessary. And if there are any left over, I want them. So I want to use a natural source. I don't want some guy saying, oh, I don't think we need that, so we'll just leave that out. I see a lot of that. It's amazing to me how they can take 26 or 27 things out of a food and then put 3 back and call it enriched. I don't understand that. There are all sorts of input considerations when I talk to growers. I talked to a fellow last night who built chicken houses in Arkansas. He said it was amazing. In 3 weeks we'd have a whole chicken house up, and we'd move to the next chicken house right there. They'd put chickens in there, and 3 weeks later they'd take the chickens off to market. Now, that's not a natural chicken. Antibiotics, GM, animal products, sewage. Incidentally, I just ordered a tractor-trailer load of gypsum to finish out a mineral order that I had for a church, having done a mineralization workshop. And you have to be careful of gypsum, because up in Kingston, Tennessee, there was something called fly ash that broke the dam and got into the river. You remember hearing that in the news? What you may not understand is that fly ash is one of the ingredients in gypsum wallboard. And there are companies that recycle sheetrock. And if you do that, or last year there were 50,000 tons of fly ash that were applied to agricultural lands, the only problem is they're high in heavy metals. So you need to be very careful of your inputs. What are you using? What is in what you are using? I had one person got some free wood chips. He was really excited. And then he couldn't grow anything for 3 years, because before that wood was chipped, it was sprayed, and he just transferred that spray to his garden. He had perfect weed control. There wasn't anything that would grow. We know that chemicals and radiation are primarily stored in body fat. We also know that 85 to 90% of dietary chemicals are from animal products consumed. Approximately 70,000 pests and plant diseases now consume over half the world's crops every year, despite the use of $35 billion worth of pesticides. Pesticide use increased 404 million pounds between 1996 and 2011 without significant yield increase. Now, if you're listening to the phrases, GMO advocates will tell you that pesticide use would decrease. It has not. Commercial agriculture uses more, and they say that they do it to feed the world's hungry. Well, if you're going to do that, you're going to have to increase your yield to be able to do that, neither of which are true. Many of the pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides, the sprays that we use in agriculture, are systemic neurotoxins. They're frontal lobe and endocrine system active, and because they are systemic, if that apple has been sprayed, you can wash the peeling off of the apple, and that apple will still have pesticide inside the apple. It's systemic. That's why the average apple that you eat that comes from the store is 14 months old. We went last year to the orchard where I used to go with my dad when I was a boy to pick up apples. And they said, "Oh, we had a late freeze. We don't have any apples. We're getting our apples from Virginia." Did you hear about that freeze in the news? No, because they had last year's crop still in the cold storage. Not an issue. And it won't deteriorate because it has systemic neurotoxins in it. That's the radioactive pattern from Fukushima Daiichi. Yesterday morning, real early, I watched a YouTube video, and a Canadian nuclear physicist was talking about what happened over there. There were 4 containment vessels. 3 were breached with water and are leaking radioactivity out into the Pacific. The fourth is damaged but not leaking water, and it contains 1,300 spent fuel rods. The report says that if they have a earthquake of 7 on the Richter scale or greater, they expect that area to breach from water, and that radioactivity contaminate out into the ocean. They set the probability of a 7 or greater earthquake in the next 3 years in Japan at about 95%. I don't know about you. Oh, he went on to say if that happened, you could pretty much forget Japan, and much of the West Coast could need to be evacuated because of the radioactivity. What has happened is the minuscule probability that something this tragic would happen, that they said, oh, that will never happen, has happened. And we are watching it unfold. The levels in our milk were way too high. I don't know whether you are familiar with the terms bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Bioaccumulation is basically where a little fish goes out and eats a plankton. That's accumulating the radioactivity that has been deposited in the plankton. That's part of life. You and I, when we eat vegetables, do that. We accumulate what's in the vegetables. The problem becomes one of biomagnification, because for every level of magnification, what's that? Well, that little fish gets eaten by a bigger fish. And that bigger fish is not going to eat just one, but every one of those levels magnifies on the order of right at 1,000. So if you have this little fish eaten by a bigger fish, that bigger fish has 1,000 times the mercury, let's say, and then it's eaten by a medium-sized fish. How many is 1,000 times 1,000? Okay, and that's a medium fish, and then a tuna comes along and says, oh, whoa, what's 1,000 times a million? You got a whole lot of mercury right there, don't you? And that's the issue that we need to be careful of. We've seen the future of medicine, and the future is food. Real Medicine, Real Health by Arden Anderson. Let food be your medicine. That's an old one. But I think he knew what he was talking about, and many of us are going back to that if we want to be safe. We can talk about crop rotation. Oh, by the way, you know how many apple varieties there were at the turn of the century? About 7,000. You know how many primary apple varieties there are right now? Commercially, about 7. Can you imagine you're a pest hunting an apple? If you only have 7 to choose from, how easy it's going to be to hop over and be immune and be really able to attack that apple very easily. Green manures and cover crops. We need to use this. We need to have an ongoing process of feeding the biology. And we'll talk about this in a minute, but these are live forms. And living things like to eat. And so if you apply biology and you don't have food for them to eat, what's going to happen? They're going to starve. So we need to think about what we're doing. I ask you, are you producing body fuel or are you eating food? Because once you get down here into the optimally processed frozen, that's better than steamed. We know that when you heat food, you destroy approximately 80% of the nutrition and you cook all the enzymes out of it, deactivate the enzymes. Then there's poorly grown organic. There's such a thing as shallow organic and deep organic. And most of what you buy in the store is shallow organic. It may be a little bit better for you, but it won't be a whole lot. And if you want the type of food that we're talking about, you're going to have to get serious and do something. You're probably going to have to grow it yourself because you can't go out here and buy it.
Shouldn't fermented be on the lower end of the
No, ma'am.
No?
Because fermented, it depends how you ferment, but you can come up with more nutrition in your fermented food, and you have not heated it to kill the enzymes, and you have not heated it to kill your nutrition. So all your enzymes, all your nutrition can be intact, and it have more food value and nutrition in it than before you actually fermented it. Good question.
What was the question?
Shouldn't your fermented food be way down on the list? Well, depending on the way you ferment it. You got to be careful. If you do it the wrong way, you're going to mess it up. But then we've got poorly mineralized, lacking water and hot, canned, processed, and junk food, which they don't even give us our daily nutrition requirements. And then Weston Price found that the people groups that he studied around the world that were on their original diet had 4 times their nutrient requirement. But when they became westernized, that took a slide down toward 100% or less. And then above that is dehydrated, fermented, raw, ripe, mineralized, heirloom, sprouts, pollen, pre-digested, and then on the very top is nutrient-dense, high-ormous, probiotic, antioxidant superfoods. And you don't have to eat nearly as much when you get the right nutrition, and you won't have near the cravings when you have the right nutrition because you're being fed. Our problem in our society is that we are sending our cravings, sugars and fats, and we get all the lifestyle diseases that come in behind them. Here's Robert Wells with some 8-pound heirloom turnips he grew in beach sand with biochar, rock minerals, sea minerals, microbes, and some more. You may have heard of terra preta. I just had dinner with my biological agronomist friend in Asheville who, along with several other fellows, are putting in a biochar production facility. Incidentally, if you are unaware, the byproducts of a biochar production facility are what? Heat and electricity. Those are the byproducts. The actual product is biochar. And that's what they found down in the Amazon basin, that the soil that grew so well had about 30% volume of biochar plus some pottery shards. So it will really produce. The energy that we use will tend, and you look right here, Country Gentleman corn has 95 days to maturity, but this corn was harvested on the 59th day from planting because they had a higher energy in the soil. So it cut the seed to harvest time by 2/3 to 2/3. That's a multiplication in your production right there. Okay? And you'll notice that the Brix values ranged from 24 to 30. On my chart last night in the seminar that I did, under sweet corn, or corn, the highest number is 24. There isn't any 30. So he had a lot higher Brix in his corn because of that energy. Here's a California English walnut. These two trees were planted on the same day 4 years before. One tree had Ormus elements applied to it. They're the nuts off of the respective trees. There is a supermarket orange and a supermarket cantaloupe and a supermarket orange and an Ormus orange. I would suggest to you that it's very easy when you begin looking at some of these things to envision a bunch of grapes that two guys would have to stick a pole through to get back to camp. All right? This fella down in Mexico planted corn, and he used Ormus materials on it. And you'll notice right here the percentage of the corn population with 2 ears per plant increased from 20 to 60%, with some plants bearing 7 to 9 ears per plant filled out to the tip. That's a pretty good production. Now, I would suggest that that's not an OSHA approved scaffolding method. But down in Mexico, they don't have OSHA, and that's all he had to get up there. That's all I can tell you, all right? You have some resources there. If you are not familiar with some of these things, you need to get familiar with it, because these things are very possible. But not only does the law of the minimum apply to the chemicals, minerals salts is what we generally use to bring the mineral level to optimal. It also applies to biology. If you have not read the tipping point, you need to do yourself a favor and read it. Because what it says is that there comes a point when you need to do just a little bit more, and you'll begin to get the results you've been aiming for all along. Let me illustrate that by some facts. Do you know how many grams are in an ounce? Huh? 28.35. That's good. In 1 gram of healthy soil, there are more organisms than the world's population. You know what an organism leaves behind when it dies? Minerals and fertilizer. And so if you're not paying attention to this little point, you really may be missing out. Our genetic expression, there's been this argument all along about which is more important, genetics or environment. I would suggest to you that at conception, it's all genetics, and it starts becoming more and more environment from then on. But that is influenced by our lifestyle choices and the factors that we encounter out in this sea of life. And if we get up on the scale, we'll probably have health. If we're not quite all the way up there, we may get some infectious disease. And if we're not careful, we'll get lifestyle disease, and we really may get some terminal diseases if we get influenced by some of the things that are out there. So we need to be aware. I'm going to skip 2 or 3 of these because of the time. Thomas Edison years ago said the doctor of the future will give no medicine but will interest his patient in the human frame and diet and the cause and prevention of disease. I don't believe that the White House eats the same food that you get when you take your food stamp card to the grocery store. I just don't believe it. This is probably a photo op piece, but anyway, that's where that's from, the White House garden. Health, the cure, and preferably the prevention of the majority of degenerative diseases and aging is the consistent daily ingestion of a comprehensive, full spectrum of disease-fighting, plant-derived bioactive substances in sufficient amounts while avoiding harmful substances. Oh, well, that's probably, all of us would vote on that one probably. Elaine Ingram, who is the world's authority on soil and probably on biology, says it's important to view the soil food web as a complex whole system. What that means is look at the whole thing. Another thing that she said is that tillage can kill 75 to 90% of your biology. So you need to think very carefully, and at the end of the presentation, I'm going to give you the manual that you can read and you can understand the whole thing and apply it however you need to apply it to what you're growing. Change will occur when sustainable agriculture, not extractive, destructive agriculture, is practiced. Pesticides and inorganic fertilizers are not needed if soil health is maintained. Tillage needs to be reduced to the minimum possible. Disease and pests are not significant in healthy, sustainable systems. Weeds are really just an indication that the system is not healthy. Nature gives growers clues with respect to what is wrong if the information is read properly. We just need to learn how to read the information being given to us. We reserve the use of pesticides and other toxic materials to the rare situation where some unusual event occurs that harms the biology that should be present. And John said the 2 times they had to spray with the fungicide, there had been an inversion. It was very hot as well as very moist. And the fungus just goes to town when that's the case. Elliot Coleman in the Winter Harvest Handbook, and he's the guru. If you want information, he's a very good source. He produces year-round vegetables using deep organic techniques in unheated greenhouses. And you're saying, well, we're in Alabama. You don't have to heat greenhouses, or if you do, you don't have to heat them very much. Well, he grows in Bar Harbor, Maine. And it's a little bit cooler up there. But his carrots are the trading staple in the school lunches for the kids. So if your kid has Coleman's carrots, they can have any part of anybody else's lunch they want. Shallow organic. Basically, shallow organic is the regular industrial agriculture with a naturally derived input. It still supports the ag community, the farmers co-op, and everybody else like that, all the food chain all the way down. That's shallow organic. Now, in the handout, you can read the rest of it. Deep organic farmers, in addition to rejecting agricultural chemicals, look for better ways to farm. Inspired by the elegance of nature's systems, they try to mimic the patterns of the natural world soil-plant economy. They do this by nurturing the soil to avoid diseases and pest problems, making and using large amounts of compost, regularly planting cover crops or green manure. See, there comes back up again. To enrich the soil and reduce erosion. Basically, excuse me, deep organic gardening works with nature and follows nature's guidelines as to how things should be grown. It reduces the number of off-site inputs such as fertilizers and mulches and focuses on growing or producing as much necessary soil building material as possible yourself. If you grow fava beans as a green manure crop, this is a test to see how well you were paying attention. How many tons of organic matter are you going to lay down in 1 year from a fava bean crop on that acre? 40 tons. Now, I have a truck and a 10-ton lowboy, but that is 4 trips somewhere getting something just to put on that acre, where I could have bought the fava bean seed and grown it myself. Okay? You see where I'm headed? Yeah?
I heard that it adds about 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre, and the heaviest feeders take only about 100.
Okay. To achieve maintenance of homeostasis, biological organisms use highly organized structures intricately designed from a diverse set of molecular and atomic building blocks to carry out the many tasks involved in healthy functioning. If a plant has the ability of radioactive metals in the soil and non-radioactive metals in the soil, the plant will select the non-radioactive metals to use. The intelligence of nature tends to work to maintain health. Life on Earth has evolved systems to selectively incorporate healthy minerals and trace elements into biological structures and to repair the damage done by low levels of radiation, which is a common phenomena even in nature. Plants, for example, yes, I mentioned that. It goes on, replenishing these systems with remineralized foods or a finely ground rock dust supplement is an important part of coping with this unprecedented radioactive stress. After Chernobyl, in another presentation, I have a slide of Chernobyl. In Austria, there were dairies that had remineralized their soil. The cheese from those dairies did not have radiation in the cheese. The Austrians would line up in long lines to get that radiation-free cheese. So if we're going to come out of this with some sensibility, we need to be growing on a deep organic basis. There are basically 3 beneficial microorganism families that we're going to be talking about this evening. Beneficial bacteria, and you'll notice the 15, 70, and 15, those are the percentages of these beneficial microorganisms that if you are going to use, you need to use them in roughly those percentages. Archaea and Eukarya, or mycorrhizal rhizomes, or beneficial fungus. Now, for our purposes, we're going to be talking primarily about endomycorrhizal rhizomes rather than ecto. Ecto are primarily woody growth plants. But let's talk about, we'll just talk about mycorrhizal rhizomes for a minute. What? That's a long word. That's a real tongue twister. The biology that we use is not harmful. In fact, the biology that I use, I buy a mother culture and brew it because it's a lot cheaper that way. You feed the bacteria and they grow rather than you having to buy them already grown that somebody else has done. They say that the guys that immerse themselves in this biology come out with fresher skin, and it will clean up all sorts of stuff in their skin. You see that guy's head down there. The light's not very good, is it? He's down in a 55-gallon barrel of beneficial bacteria. He's just showing you that it's safe. Let's talk about down on the bottom, the mycorrhizal rhizomes are known to increase root mass 100 to 1,000 times. We know that there is one mycorrhizal rhizome species per type of plant. In other words, blueberries like a certain one. So if you're planting a whole field of blueberry bushes, you need to think about which one you're going to be using. What happens with the mycorrhizal rhizomes, and we haven't understood this all along, is that the plant root will exude or give off up 20 to 50% of the plant sap. The mycorrhizal rhizomes will colonize around the roots and live on that plant sap. And what their function is when the plant says, I need a copper mineral, the rhizome reaches out and sends one up because it's right on the root, sends the plant the copper mineral that it needs. And that's the function of the mycorrhizal rhizomes. Now, since we know that they colonize the roots, is it going to do any good just to spread it on the ground? Because what's going to happen? They're going to die because what do they live on? Plant sap. So what we do is we have a little bowl, and when we transplant, we water our transplant. You got it. You just poke the transplant up and you pop it down on that bowl and you transplant it. You get it right on the roots every time. You just go right down along. Now, you can broadcast it, put it down the row, do it another way, but that's the most effective and efficient way that I know of. Both the bacteria and the mycorrhizal rhizomes have a nucleus. Archaea is an RNA organism instead of a DNA organism, and it has no nucleus, and it lives off of energy. What energy is out there in the field? Come on, help me. Sunlight. Yeah, what else? Sun, air, water. What about the paramagnetism in the soil? And what the archaea does is it pulls the elemental minerals out of the soil and makes them available to the plant. So does humic and fulvic acid. That's the active ingredient in humus. We can apply humates, which are 40 to 70% humic and fulvic acid, to chemically remove those elemental minerals from the soil and make them plant available. But that's what the archaea do. Now, they have a lifespan of about 20 minutes. So you're not going to want to put them in a tank. Excuse me. You're not going to want to put them in a tank and spray them down through several hours, because you're not going to have them. You want to apply them directly to the soil, and they will go to work breaking the soil down. Those two you apply directly to the soil or the roots, all right? The beneficial biology, and I use a type that you can take internally as well as brew and spray. I figure it has to be safe if you can take it internally and change your flora. But what you do is you make a compost tea out of this biology. You can use worm castings, you can use an inoculant, and you put your mother culture in there, and your biology will grow. You have to give it oxygen. You have to give it food in the form of generally molasses, and you can use some trace minerals in it as well. But you will then spray it on the plants so that the plant has beneficial microorganisms on its surface rather than fungus and mold and all the other things. I also use yucca extract, which opens the plant pores and allows the plant to uptake whatever you're spraying a lot better. Now that's basically the whole story in a nutshell. If you're going to brew and manage effective microorganisms, you're going to need a container with a spigot. I'd put a spigot in a 5-gallon bucket. You're going to need a bubbler or diffuser. You're going to need rich compost, an inoculant, molasses, which have no preservatives, because what are the preservatives going to do? They're going to kill off your microorganisms. And you're going to foliar feed, and you need to ensure that you have food for those essential microorganisms. Now, what is food for, what do they use for food? Now, they're a DNA, they have a nucleus. What do they use for food? Sugar? Well, they can. Is that the best thing? What? One of the things that they are going to use for food are all those nasties that are on the leaf. They're going to eat them. That's what you want. You'll notice from the prior slide that the pH of this brew, of your compost tea, is in the 3.5 to 4 range. So your chemical pH will destroy some of your pests right off the bat. But they will also use cellulosic material. What in the world is that? What? Those are those corn stalks that you see out there, all that fodder and wheat straw and all those other things. You know that you have a fairly sterile soil when you go by the next spring and all those corn stalks are still right there. There isn't much biology to break it down. This is a picture of John Evans garden up in Palmer, Alaska. There he is with a, well, that one's a 18.9 pound carrot, as I recall. This broccoli head was 35 pounds. I don't know that I ever knew how much that zucchini weighed or how much that beet weighed. What you find is all the guys that raise big vegetables use biology. That's just the way it is. Now, I will tell you, when I talked to Guy McGowan about archaea, he said that he had talked to John Evans, and John Evans, incidentally, has 8 or 9 world blue ribbons for vegetable production, about 350 state blue ribbons. But John was only growing cabbages that were 43 pounds. And Guy McGowan said, "Hey man, you need to use some archaea on that." He said, "Well, send it to me. I'll use it." And so he did. And he did. And he went from 43 pounds to 110 pounds in his cabbage. Now, I don't know what you'd do with a 110-pound cabbage. I guess you'd have to have the whole community in for coleslaw. I don't know. I wouldn't want to have to refrigerate the leftovers, I know that. But I can tell you, I did a growing class over in North Carolina, and I was at the market. There's a community of plain folk down below us. Some of them grow naturally, some of them don't. You know what you do if you're a teenage, plain young guy for fun? Huh? Grow carrots. Well, my friend's son grew watermelons. The one I bought was only 124 pounds. And I took it, we had it, we cut it up. They had it for potluck on Sabbath. But that wasn't the big one. The one his son grew, and they weighed it out in the field the week before, and it only weighed 185 pounds. And Paul said, I could have kicked myself, because I told him just go out there on Monday morning and pick the thing, and we'd take it to the store and weigh it. And they took it to the store and they weighed it, and it only weighed 196 pounds, which tied with the champion in that community. If they'd only waited 2 or 3 more days, they would have had the champion instead of tying. Yes?
Can you just briefly explain archaea so we better understand what it is?
It's, okay, it's an elemental life form that they had it off in various other forms. Various families, they didn't know what it did. But let's back up. I talked to you about Fukushima Daiichi, all right? There was a fellow by the name of Robert Oppenheimer that ended up in a little town in a valley not far from us called Oak Ridge, in charge of developing the atomic bomb. Yeah, that's the place where the deer glow at night. Yeah. Because remember, you remember our biomagnification. All right, no, that's part jest. There's also another brother whose name is Carl Oppenheimer, Robert's brother, who was the world's premier biologist for a number of years. And in the 30s and 40s, Carl founded what we know as bioremediation. And he was using archaea to clean up the radiation that his brother was creating and they were testing out in the Pacific. Remember, we talked that it consumes energy. Well, that's oil, hydrocarbons, that's chemicals, that's radionuclides. All of those are energy, and Archaea reduces them. And that's why I'm suggesting to you that you need deep organic production in your food to be able to deal with the environmental issues that surround us. If you're not growing on that level, quit and buy shallow organic from Earth Fare or Trader Joe's. It won't matter, you know. Or if you really don't care, buy the stuff that comes out of California. It's commercial, okay? Does that help you? A little bit. You could talk about that for a couple of hours. Yes, ma'am. Well, I buy it. It's called in fact, I'll tell you, I'll bring some. There's some in the back of the car. It's called Biozome. It's just a little canister that has some dehydrated Archaea in it. Yes?
It says on the sheet that it's a beneficial microorganism, so that would be an organic beneficial organism we found in most healthy soils?
It can be found, well, you got to be careful. It's primarily derived from the volcanic rims where it's real hot, the hot mud pots out in Yellowstone. Those areas are where it has a very wide temperature range, so it will stay active, but that's where it primarily accumulates. But yes, in answer to your question, if you till, if you use commercial fertilizer, if you compact your ground, you're going to kill off all of these things. 75 to 90% of them will be dead, okay? And even more if you use chemical fertilizers, okay? So you're not going to have them if you don't grow naturally. There's Chernobyl and the cheese. Remineralization protects not only soil and plants for radioactivity, but humans too, supplying abundant minerals, especially trace elements to the human body, improves radiation tolerance, immune system integrity, and radiation exposure recovery. I want to point out the bottom reference. That manual right there is Elaine Ingram's Compost Tea Brewing Manual, the 5th edition in PDF form. So if you want to know what the world's authority says about it, there's your source. If you want to know what she says about soil in general, you can go to Nutrition Rules, R-U-L-E-S, by Graham, G-R-A-H-M-E, Sait, S-A-I-T. He's an Australian, and he interviewed 22 people, and Elaine Ingram was one of them. And you'll learn, do you know why you shouldn't stand on a bed that you've prepared? Compaction. All the answers to all the questions you've wondered about soil is going to be there. We've got to decide what we're going to do. Am I going to produce body fuel, or am I going to eat food? Jill and I last year were at Acres USA and watched Genetic Roulette. How many of you have seen Genetic Roulette? If you haven't, you need to watch it. Because even the squirrels know better than some of us. The animals will not choose it. Vote with your dollars. Read the labels. Become a knowledgeable consumer. Buy fresher, naturally grown, garden. Do you want quality of life? Do you want to pay now or do you want to pay later? There's the saying that most of us spend our life to gain wealth. And once we gain the wealth, spend the wealth to regain our health. So what do you want? As for me, I want to grow premium body fuel. Now, that gentleman right there had a question.
Yes, I wanted to know, is it possible to grow archaea or produce it by yourself?
Sure, you can, but it's not worth it. That little canister, I think, is about $35. And you have to have a lot of equipment for temperature and all sorts of other stuff, and then you have to pull it out. You have to treat it so that it will stay alive but not active. It will hibernate per se. And yes, you can, but it's probably not financially feasible for the average person.
You said something about humic acid and fulvic acid.
Yes.
Is that was in line with that archaea?
No, that's the other side. The archaea pull the soil down into elemental minerals from the process that they use. The humic and fulvic acid does the same thing, but it's a chemical reaction of that acid on the soil. Now, the reason biochar and organic matter is so important is that holds that elemental, mineral, water-soluble in the root zone. It doesn't allow it to leach on into the subsoil. It holds it there and it's plant available that way. And that's why those two are so important. Yes?
What do you do instead of tilling?
Well, you can do all sorts of things. Tilling, you can use a broad fork. You can use a plow and a double disc, which is a whole lot better than a tiller. Okay? I use a spring tooth tiller that has 7 or 9 shanks in it, goes down. Or if I really want to cheat and I'm starting out fresh, I have a D4 that has a root rake on the front of it, and you double root rake it, and it's down about that deep and all broken up, and the roots are gone pretty much. But that's what I would do. Okay, I know. He's pointing to the clock. I'll be glad to answer any more questions. Sorry about the technical difficulties. See you next round. Let me know if you have questions. I'll try and help you. Oh. Okay. Good night. God bless.
Thank you.
Yeah.